Hey everyone, this is Shintai, and here with me I have my good friend, RPG Swagman. How you doing, man?
Good. Hello, fellow adventurers. I hope you're looking forward to this review. I know I am.
Definitely, because today we're going to be talking about E7. This is a series which Swagman here has a very strong affinity for, and it's one that I've recently started really getting into. E7 is pretty much the latest game in the series, well, that's been released over here. They've also released East Salsetta on the PS Vita, but that's only, as of this recording, been released in Japan. Hopefully we'll get that too.
Absolutely. It got released at the end of September, and it's the latest in the East series, but it's actually a remake of East 4, and I pretty much enjoyed my time. I've got some different opinions of it, but I'll probably save that for another time.
E7 is an action RPG on the PSP. I haven't played too many games on the PSP. This is one of the only ones that I finished. I thought it was awesome. Again, I haven't played that many yet, but this is already one of my favorites on the PSP. I thought this was a great little game. I think it's also a really great introduction to the East series. If you're thinking about getting into the East series, E7, I think, is a great way to start. It is different from the other games because it has a new battle system. It does a few things differently. It has a party system. We'll get into that later. There's a lot of things that they've added into this game, but it's very easy and accessible to just kind of jump into and just start playing. Now, as a longtime fan of the series, Swag, how did you feel going into E7?
Well, I noticed the change very early because I've been following E7 since its announcement in Japan, so it's been a long journey to me actually playing it in English. When I thought the change, I seriously thought that it was actually a good decision on Falcom. The E series has a lot of great characters, even though the previous games it's just Adol by himself being the one-man army, so to speak. He has some really good friends, and of course, his lifelong hetero soulmate, Dogi, has been in nearly every game, and one of my wishes was to play as Dogi in an East game, and when I found out that you couldn't in E7, it was one of my wishes came true. And of course, you can have the other character because it's a free character party system. I thought to myself, it reminded me of another action RPG that I'm very fond of, and that's Secret of Mana. And I've always wanted to play another game similar to Secret of Mana, so to have an East game that essentially played like an enhanced version of Secret of Mana, I was really excited. When I actually got my hands on it, it just played like a dream. It was super lightning quick. Dodging was an art form. It has probably the best dodging system ever in a video game. It was so intense, it puts you into the combat even more. And of course, it has this very engrossing skill system where when you learn new skills, you've got about 10 levels to basically level them up to maximum. You actually can't use the skill until you get to level 1. That's probably one of the biggest things I've noticed with E7 is out of every game in the series, it has the most RPG elements to it. Whereas it was a stable action RPG game before, E7 just introduced a lot more RPG elements, and it felt more of an RPG than to an action game. But the controls was just some of the best I ever experienced. In my opinion, E7 is the epitome of what an action RPG should be.
Yeah, I always felt playing the other East games, they were heavier on the action, lighter on the RPG, and I definitely feel that E7 has definitely added a lot more RPG elements into it. I really think that it helps make this game just a lot more accessible and a lot more enjoyable. I found myself just trying to level up all of Adol's skills and just using them constantly over and over again, trying to max it out. Leveling up the skills is just a lot of fun, especially for skills that are really cool and really a lot of fun to use. Using them over and over again, try to leveling up, it becomes really addicting. Another thing I really liked about this game, though, I liked how you learned your skills. In this game, it's very similar to how Final Fantasy IX works and how Tales of Vesperia works, where you get your skills from your weapons. Each weapon has a skill attached to it. And if you keep using that skill over and over again, you can learn that skill and not have to use it only when you're using that weapon. You can just use it whenever you want. It's especially cool for Adol because I noticed as you play through the game, since Adol can use 3 different kinds of weapons, he can use slash Pierce and Strike, some of the skills that he would get would be similar to that style. So if you had like a piercing weapon, the skill attached to it had like a piercing kind of move attached to it. I think there was one called Dominator. He would start stabbing like crazy. And that's actually another really cool thing about this game, is that you can switch between these different fighting styles, and you have other characters that have these fighting styles. But it isn't just there just to be there. There are certain enemies that are weak against these fighting styles. There are some really tough enemies that can only be beaten with the strike attack. There are squishier enemies that you can hit them with the slash attack, and there are some that are airborne that need to be taken down with the pierce. This adds another layer of depth to the game. It isn't just about hitting the enemies mindlessly. It's about, okay, I need to use this kind of weapon. This character uses this kind of weapon, so I need to have this kind of character with me. There's a lot of thought process that goes into it, and it's a lot of fun to be switching back and forth between characters, which is done really well in the game. You just tap the circle button and you immediately switch to another character. It works really well and really fast. You just jump in there and just start wailing away. And the AI is great. They're very unobtrusive. They don't use your items. They don't get in your way. I thought that was great, because there are games where the AI is really annoying. But this game, the AI was spot on.
Absolutely agree. It's very strategic how they went about the battle system with switching characters on the fly. Of course, one thing I found humorous is Adol couldn't do major damage to rock monsters, but of course good old Dogi the Roll Crusher would destroy them in seconds. And I thought how fantastic they went about thinking about how the game works. It's just little things like that that make the difference.
Now, I also thought that the boss fights in this game were really fun. I just loved running in and beating the crap out of these bosses. They were just tons of fun to fight. A big reason why was this new mechanic that's added in the game. It really doesn't come into play that much when you're fighting normal enemies, even though it is there. It's more important in boss fights, and that's the stun meter. There's a blue meter when you're fighting the enemy above his life bar. When you fill it out, the enemy gets stunned. For that amount of time, you can just start wailing on him. And you can use this to either get your extra meter back, which is kind of like your limit break, or you can use that to get your SP back so you can then turn around and use skills. It adds even more to the game and makes the game even more fun. Seeing a boss helpless when just beforehand he was kicking your butt, the game just letting you wail on him is really satisfying.
If there's one thing that East does well, and it doesn't matter which East game you play, is boss battles. The series is famous, or I should say infamous, for it.
Dark fact.
But no, the boss battles in E7 is just really well done. As I said before, the dodging mechanic comes into play, like Shintai said, of course, stunning the enemy, building up that extra skill meter. Whatever character you're playing just goes nuts. And you get into a rhythm of using your normal skills and then using the extra skills and just getting things down pat. It's just really, really, really good and incredibly fun. And of course, the bosses are varied from giant birds to giant crabs until a certain mythological creature that you have to fight later in the game. It's really, really cool.
Another thing that helps this game, since it was made specifically for the PSP, the graphics in this game look really good. This is a really great looking PSP game in my opinion. Everything's really colorful, looks vibrant, has enough detail in it so you can tell what's going on screen. Even though the battles are really fast paced, I rarely got lost within the action. Everything seemed pretty clear when I was playing the game.
Absolutely. One thing I noticed with East 7, something I rarely talk about, and that's the camera. The camera in East 7 is amazing. Like, it will zoom in on certain parts of the area, and it just puts you more into the game. Like I said before, it has some of the best, it just tracks the party extremely well. There's even some parts in the game where they track the party, but they want you to focus on a certain location in the background that you're heading towards to. Oh, it's just so well done. It really is. It's something I've noticed in the later East games. This is also something included in Celceta, is just the camera is just flawless. One of the best camera controls ever in a game. One thing I should add about the art style of E7 was the final art style that's presented in the game was not the original artist. The original art they actually wanted for E7 was met with extreme disdain by the fans. And I saw it and it looked horrible. Like the characters were really distorted. And so I was very thankful that Falcom decided to scrap it and get a new artist in there. They look great. I like what they did for Adol. A lot of people kind of were hum and ha with Dogi. I thought he looked fine. They thought he looked too much of a beefcake than before, but I thought it was fine.
Hey, if he's a wall crusher, he's gotta be a beefcake.
He's gotta be a beefcake. Yeah, I didn't mind. I think because they were getting off like his square jaw, it's like, well, that's kind of Dogi, you know?
When I saw Dogi in E7, I was like, yeah, that looks like Dogi. That's how he should look.
Yeah.
I didn't have any problems with it.
Of course, you've got Aisha, who fits the bill of, I wouldn't say the spoiled princess, but the Middle Eastern type princess really well. Then you've got Elk, who's the forest child. Really cool. I really like his weapon, even though I rarely used him in the game, like ever, until like a certain part of the game where you have to use him. Then you've got Mustafa, who's the desert dweller. Like, he's a beefcake like Dogi, except he's got a giant hammer. He's probably the least used character that I used in the game. And you got Mishera, who is the blind seer sorceress. I really liked her character, and I used her a couple of times. But one thing Falcom did that was really good, and it's probably one of their best qualities, is they like to tie each East game loosely to each other. And the way they did this in E7 is bring back Geis. Who's pretty much established himself as Adol Christen's rival. How they brung him back into the game was fantastic. They really thought about the fans in this regard. And I will admit, I did use Geis a lot in the game.
Yeah, I pretty much had the same party as you, basically. Obviously, you have to have Adol in your team. I always use Dogi, Aisha, and Geis. And the only times I would use the other characters is to learn their skills, because I just like every time someone got a new weapon, I was like, alright, I gotta learn their skills for this weapon, and I think I did learn every single skill for every character.
Well, it's systems like that that draw you into the game, where you're playing East, or you're playing Final Fantasy 9, or you're playing Tales of Grace's F. It just provides this nice little system that rewards players for their time and effort. It's very old school. I come from a very old school background where I like to earn everything I do in the game. I make the game easier because I choose to. I think E7 does it very well.
I think that's one of the appealing things about RPGs in general, is that your hard work is rewarded. Another thing that's great about this game, and it's something that's great about all the East games, is the music. Holy shit! The music in this game is awesome. I got the limited edition of this game that comes with the soundtrack, and I remember when I first bought it, on the drive home, I put in the soundtrack, and I was rocking all the way back home. It was awesome.
One of the defining features of the E-Series is the music. They have probably the forerunners of video game music in the industry. Their sound team is Sound Team JDK, where they create the original music, but most of the people that create their music are also a part of a different team called Band JDK, where they actually perform the music from Falcom games at live events, and they get sold out because the music is just that good. And one of the main reasons I'm a Falcom fan, not just because of the games, it's because the music is the best, period. It really is. An E7 soundtrack did not disappoint. I've got a few examples here that I'm going to run off, so if you're listening to this review and you want to go out and try some of this music, I highly recommend it, because it might be the deciding factor for you to play the game. You got the original intro, Innocent Primeval Breaker, Mother Earth Altego, Vacant Interference, Smashing Through the Mountain Path, Crossing Rage, and of course, probably easily my favorite track in the game is To Reveal the Way to Go.
The music is just awe-inspiring. That's one of the really great things about the series, is that the music hasn't really changed all that much. but it doesn't need to because it's just so good. I'm glad that it's pretty much stayed the same because I wouldn't want it to change. It's just awesome.
All I could say is during the 80s and the 90s, it was pretty much rock orientated more than anything. But at the turn of the new millennium, they focused on other instruments, and one of my favorite instruments is the violin, and the violinist for band JDK, she can rock out more hardcore than any of those guys with electric guitars any day. Just amazing. And they've even got saxophones. They use every instrument they can possibly can to enhance their music. So if you're a lover of video game music and you haven't played the E-Series, you need to change that quickly.
Something that the E-Series is, it's not that this is done badly in the E-Series, but the E-Series isn't quite as known for having really well done stories or like really engrossing stories. Not to say that they've ever been like really bad or anything. The story usually kind of takes like a backseat compared to the other elements in the game. However, I feel that in E7, they kind of stepped it up a notch a bit. I felt that the story was done pretty well in E7. I felt that the characters in this, since we were talking before about how it's become a lot more party-based, a lot of them are pretty likable characters. I felt that some of the things that happened in the game, most of it was pretty standard, but there were a few twists here and there where I was actually taken aback. I was like, oh wow, I didn't see that coming. Or maybe something did happen that I was expecting, but it didn't happen in quite the way I was expecting. And that actually kind of surprised me. I thought the story in E7, probably, at least of what I've played, one of the better of the series. Because usually the stories are just nice and simple and charming. And in here it still retains that nice simple charm, but there's a little more to it than that.
Most East games are very short. E7's actually the longest game. You can beat in between 25 to 30 hours. Say like East 1 only takes about 4 hours to beat, so there's a huge difference. As a hardcore East fan, I usually argue with a lot of people when they mention the story, but I think Shintai kind of said it better than most people. They are very simple stories, but the fact of the matter is I enjoy them more than 50% of the other RPGs presented out there. The reason for this is I think East does their characters a lot better with the traits, the situations they put them in. And one of the other reasons why the East is so good is because they actually have some of the best villains ever in a video game.
Villains are pretty cool.
I can just definitely say that if you're interested in that regard, East 2's probably got some of the best villains, but I really like the characters of East 7. One thing I've noticed is they returned it back to the old system. There was a good period, the 2000s, where they created East games where each character had their own personality, their own name, and their own artwork. There was no generic NPCs. With E7, they've kind of gone back to throwing generic NPCs, but because of the scope of E7, it kind of called for it. But it still has a great cast of characters.
Yeah, I liked a lot of the characters too. I thought Aisha was a really good counterbalance to Adol and Dogi, which is why a good majority of the game is just the three of them. I thought the three of them especially worked really well together. Adol is the silent protagonist we all know and love. Dogi is the sometimes wisecracking best friend. Aisha is the spunky little girl that tails along. And I thought the three of them just worked really well together.
Yeah, they were a great trio, and it encompasses everything, like the gallant hero, the beefcake, wisecracking best friend, and then you got the young female princess type character. Kind of hits all the balls in the park.
She's got a lot of moxie.
But the other characters, of course, were good. They gave you a good choice. Like Elk, of course, is the child character. He's also the cheeky one. And Mustafa's the beefcake, but he's the opposite of Dogi. He's the stern, serious type. Untrustworthy.
I feel that out of the trio, I felt that Geis and Mishera were the better ones. I thought that they were the most interesting. Although it is a little unfair because Geis had another game where he had development. I still really liked him, but Mishera was really cool because she was a blind character. She was also like a Cirrus. People didn't look down on her for being blind or anything. Nobody pitied her for being blind. She was given a lot of respect. And I thought that was a great way of going about it. People weren't like, oh, pobrecita, she's blind. No, she could fight on her own. People didn't hold her hand. And she was really cool because of that. She was a very respectable character. and she gave respect where respect was due.
One thing I really like in RPGs where it's very carbon cut, where you go into a town and you get one character that's got a certain role in the village, but there's always someone higher. So it was really cool when Mishera, who is probably the highest authority in that village, joins your party. That's just one of the little things that I really like in some RPGs.
We've gone over the characters. Now, for the actual main story of E7, Adol and Dogi are looking to go on a new adventure. They find themselves in the land of Altago. In this new land, it turns out that Adol, yet again, has been chosen to be the savior. What's interesting is these people seem to worship these dragons. Now that immediately caught my attention because you don't normally hear of people worshiping dragons. That seemed a little odd to me, but I thought it was really cool and interesting as well. And it seems that these dragons are the ones that called for Adol. As you play through the game, go to these shrines for these different dragons, you actually get different gameplay mechanics as you progress through the game, which I actually thought was really cool. I thought the story was pretty good, honestly. I mentioned before that there were some twists and turns here and there, but I thought the story as a whole was done really well, and is mostly pretty easy to understand. Which is another reason why I said this is a good game for people who are trying to become fans to jump into, because you don't need previous knowledge of the other games. You can just kind of jump into it, and it's kind of like its own enclosed story.
It's one of the games where you can come into it if you haven't experienced it before, but you'll notice certain little things that if you have, it's a nice little thing that they give to the fans. One thing I just got to say about E7's story is it was actually known before the game's development. There was an article, I can't remember where it was printed from, but it actually chronicled a few adventures of Adol Kristen that did not have games yet, and the one that sparked everyone's interest was the 5 Dragons of Altago. This was years before E7 came into development, so when they chose the story, they based it off that information, which I always find is awesome when they pre-establish events that have happened and decide to make games based off that. You know, it gives the fans something to look forward to.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me how in Ys 1, if you read the books of Ys, Salsetta is mentioned in one of the books, and I would imagine that's also long before Ys Salsetta was in production.
Yeah, it was pretty much hinted that it could have been the next journey for Adol to have, and it was. So it was really nice of Falcom to do that. One thing I really like about Ys is there's a certain method to how the game always begins and how it ends, and it begins with E7 with Adol and Dogi on a boat. Surprisingly, Adol did not walk the plank and nearly get drowned and find himself washed to shore like he does in most Ys games.
Like in 6.
Yeah, I really like how it happened with E7, how they get into Altago City. Within moments of entering the city, he helps someone in distress. His reward for that is 1 ticket to the Slammer. But the one thing that worked really well is he gets released because of his reputation, and that's one thing that E7 does well is up to this point, Adol Kristen has about close to 7 years worth of adventuring, and his reputation precedes him. People in high authority know who he is, and that plays into E7 a lot.
Yeah, everyone keeps calling him Adol the Red, which is the nickname that he has attained over the years. So it is pretty interesting that people are like, you must be Adol the Red. It really does settle in the fact that this is the 7th game in the series. Adol has been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, and I just think it cements him more as a legendary video game character because he's been established since the 80s, and I think there's been characters that haven't even lasted long that he has, so I definitely say he's attained legendary status as of 2012.
It's time to start winding down, folks. Pretty much, E7, in my opinion, is a truly great game. If you have a PSP and you're itching for a fun action RPG, E7 is definitely one to pick up. It won't blow you away, it doesn't break new ground, but it doesn't need to, and it's fine for what it is. Because what it does extremely well. It's a really fun game, it's a really good looking game, and it won't just end right away. It's a game that will last you quite a bit. And after you've finished it, you can go back and play it again on a harder difficulty. So if you really want to 100% this game, there is tons for you to do. The only real problem I have concerning this is that the game does have missables, which I'm never a fan of. But regardless, this is a game that I really recommend if you're a fan of action RPG and have dust on your PSP for some odd reason and you want to play a really fun game. E7 is definitely a great choice, especially, as I've said before, if you want to get into the series. This is a great introduction and may inspire you to want to play other great games in the series.
Basically, E7 was my favorite game of 2010. I played it in Japanese before XSEED announced it, and then there was a long but worthwhile wait to play it in English. And I just got to take the time to say thank you to Nihon Falcom for creating this wonderful game, and thank you to the team at XSEED for a flawless translation that was really, really good. And thank you to XSEED for putting the amazing special edition where you got like a soundtrack, a series art book, and a cloth map that I will probably frame one day. The effort they went to basically resurrect the series in the Western audience is just remarkable, and they've pretty much done a good job. They've established Ys again in the West, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the team at XSEED will do in the next couple of years.
Thanks a lot for joining me on this review, man. Everyone be sure to check out RPG Swagman's channel. He's got RPG in his name. That alone is enough reason to check out his channel.
It could be misleading, but no. If you're a big fan of Ys or want to know more about Ys, I've got tons of videos on the series, but there's a lot of other RPG series I'm a big fan of. So if you love RPGs, you want to chat to me about RPGs, just shoot me a message and I'll return it.
This has been Shintai and RPG Swagman.
Take care, all.
Take care, everyone.